My husband's family called me the empty house. For 6 years, and on the morning of his wedding to another woman, I walked into the ceremony holding an envelope that would destroy them all. They never looked at me like I was human. Not really. After the diagnosis, I became a problem they wanted to solve. And the worst part, the man who promised to love me sat in silence while they tore me apart. But what I found 2 days before the wedding changed everything I thought I knew about pain, betrayal, and who was truly broken. My name is Aveline Hart. I am 31 years old. For 6 years, I believed my body had failed me. Every fertility specialist, every blood test, every ultrasound delivered the same cold verdict. Very unlikely to conceive. My mother-in-law made sure I never forgot it. And my husband? He stopped defending me long before he stopped looking at me. Then one evening, his family sat me down and announced he would marry again, so someone else could give them an heir. I cried until I had no tears left. But 2 days before the ceremony, while packing his old clothes, I found a drawer that should have stayed locked. Before I tell you what was inside, take a moment to subscribe to Winds of Thought and tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were me? Now let me take you back to the beginning. I met Daniel Mercer when I was 25. He worked in commercial real estate, always wore a navy blue coat, and had this quiet way of listening that made you feel seen. I was a pediatric nurse at the time. I spent my days around children, sick children, scared children, but children who laughed and cried and filled rooms with life. I loved every single one of them, and I wanted that for myself more than anything. I wanted a house full of small, messy miracles. Daniel said he wanted the same. On our second date, he told me he dreamed of coaching his son's soccer team. I almost cried right there in the restaurant. We married within 14 months. The first year was everything I had hoped for. Mornings with coffee on the balcony, late night conversations about baby names, lazy Sundays where we did nothing but hold each other. But then the trying began, and nothing happened. At first I told myself to be patient. These things take time, right? My own mother took almost 2 years to conceive me. So I smiled, tracked my cycles, bought ovulation kits and prayed. Daniel would rub my back and say, "It'll happen when it's meant to." I believed him. 6 months passed, then 12, then 18. And that quiet hope started turning into a screaming fear inside my chest. Have you ever wanted something so badly that every month felt like a funeral? We decided to see a specialist. I remember the waiting room, beige walls, old magazines, a woman with a newborn in a carrier. I stared at that baby until my eyes burned. The doctor called us in. He was kind, but kindness doesn't soften bad news. He looked at my charts, then at me, and said, "Your ovarian reserve is significantly lower than expected for your age. There are additional factors. I'm sorry, but natural conception is highly unlikely." I didn't cry in the office. I just sat there, nodding, as if he had told me the weather forecast. Daniel held my hand. He said, "We'll figure it out." But his grip was loose. I felt it then, the first tiny crack. We went to a second doctor. Then a third. Then a fourth in a different state. Every single report said the same thing: diminished probability. Consider alternative family building options. Each diagnosis carved a piece out of me. I tried hormone treatments that made me sick. I changed my diet, my exercise, my sleep. I lit candles in churches I hadn't visited since childhood. Nothing worked, and Daniel began to change. He stopped rubbing my back. He stopped saying, "Whoop." He started coming home late, smelling of whiskey and cheap cologne. I told myself he was just stressed. But when does stress turn into distance? And when does distance turn into abandonment? His mother, Margaret, found out about the diagnosis during a family dinner. She didn't even lower her voice. "So you're telling me there will be no grandchildren from this marriage?" she said, looking directly at me. Daniel's sister Chloe laughed and added, "Well, some women just aren't built for it." I excused myself to the bathroom and sat on the cold towel for 20 minutes. That was only the beginning. Over the next 3 years, the comments became a daily ritual. Margaret would call me the empty house in front of guests. Chloe posted passive-aggressive memes about infertility on Facebook. At holiday gatherings, they would pass around baby photos of Daniel's cousins and say things like, "Too bad Aveline can't give us one of these." And Daniel, He used to mumble "nuff" occasionally. But by year 4, he said nothing. He would stare at his plate or screw his phone while his family buried me in shame. His silence was louder than their cruelty. I started believing I was defective, not just infertile, broken as a woman, as a wife, as a human being. I stopped calling my own friends because I couldn't bear their pity. I stopped going to baby showers. I stopped smiling in photographs. Every night, I would lie next to Daniel, who now slept facing the wall, and whisper to myself, "You are the reason he's unhappy." 6 years of this. 6 years of tests, tears, and humiliation. Until the evening everything shattered. It was a Tuesday in October. I remember because the leaves outside our window were orange. And I thought how strange it was that things could die so beautifully. Daniel's entire family gathered in our living room. Margaret sat in the largest armchair like a queen passing judgment. Chloe stood behind her smirking. And Daniel sat on the couch, hands folded, face blank. Margaret cleared her throat. "We've made a decision." My stomach dropped. She continued, "Daniel is 35, he needs an heir. This family needs a future." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Aveline, you cannot provide that. So Daniel will take a second wife." I thought I had measured. I looked around the room, at Chloe's grin, at Daniel's empty eyes, at Margaret's stone expression. No one objected. No one even blinked. I turned to Daniel. My voice came out as a whisper. "Please. Tell me this is a joke." He looked at me for the first time in weeks. And he said, "I think it's the only way." Something inside me cracked open, not broke, cracked. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. "After everything I've endured," I said, "the treatments, the insults, the loneliness, this is what I get?" Margaret waved her hand. "Don't be dramatic. You knew this was a possibility." I looked at Daniel one last time, hoping for a miracle. He turned away. That was the moment I stopped loving him. Not with a bang. With a whimper. I walked to the bedroom, closed the door, and cried until I had nothing left. Then I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling. What do you do when the person who promised to protect you becomes your executioner? The next weeks were a nightmare. Wedding planning began immediately. Margaret interviewed potential brides like she was hiring a servant. They settled on a woman named Naomi, 24, from a good family, with wide hips and a naive smile. I watched them bring her to the house. I watched Daniel shake her father's hand. I watched Chloe measure Naomi for a wedding dress while standing 3 feet away from me. No one asked how I felt. No one cared. I was a ghost in my own home. One day, I found Daniel in the kitchen. I blocked his path. "Please," I said. "We can try one more doctor, one more treatment. I'll do anything." He sighed like I was a telemarketer. "Aveline, it's over. Accept it." I grabbed his sleeve. "You made a vow to me." He pulled his arm away. "And you made a vow to give me children." Those words hit me like a slap. I stepped back, he walked out, and I stood there, realizing that the man I married had died a long time ago. What remained was a stranger who blamed me for his disappointment. 2 days before the wedding, everyone went out for a final fitting. The house was empty for the first time in weeks. I decided to pack my things. I was done. I would leave before the ceremony and never look back. I went into Daniel's closet. He had moved his clothes out of our shared room months ago, and started pulling old suits off hangers. As I reached into the back corner, my fingers against a small metal lockbox. I had never seen it before. It wasn't locked. My heart began to pound. I opened the box slowly. Inside were bank statements, an old passport, and a thick manila envelope. The envelope had no label, but it was worn at the edges, opened and resealed many times. My hands trembled as I slid out the contents. Medical reports. Daniel's name at the top. Daniel Mercer. Date of birth matching his. And a diagnosis I had to read 3 times before my brain accepted it. Severe oligospermia with complete astenospermia. Probability of natural conception near 0. Recommended donor sperm or adoption. I dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor like wounded birds. I picked them up again, my vision blurring. The report was dated 7 years ago. 1 year before we even started trying. He knew. He had known before we married. He knew when he watched me go to doctor after doctor. He knew when his mother called me the empty house. He knew when he blamed me for 6 years of agony. And he said nothing. I sat on the floor of his closet, surrounded by his expensive shoes and tailored jackets, and I felt something I had never felt before. Not sadness, not anger, clarity, cold, sharp, surgical clarity. It wasn't me. It was never me. He had let me destroy myself to protect his own secret. Every hormone shot, every sleepless night, every whispered prayer. All of it because he was too much of a coward to admit the truth. What kind of man watches his wife bleed inside for 6 years and says nothing? I didn't cry this time. I stood up, folded the reports carefully, and placed them in my purse. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was pale, my eyes red, but my jaw was set. I whispered to my reflection, "You are not broken, you were never broken, and tomorrow, he will answer for every single day of silence." The truth doesn't break you. The lie does. I left the house before dawn the next morning. I drove 40 miles to a clinic Daniel had never taken me to, a small office run by a female doctor with kind eyes. I requested a full fertility workup. The nurse looked at my chart, then at me, and said, "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" I nodded. She squeezed my hand. 3 hours later, the doctor came out with my results. She was smiling. "Aveline, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. Your levels are normal, your anatomy is normal. You could conceive naturally or with minimal assistance." I sat in that plastic chair and laughed. Not a happy laugh, a broken, guttural, healing laugh. Then I cried. Then I laughed again. The doctor handed me tissues and said, "Who told you otherwise?" I said, "My husband." She frowned but didn't push. I took the report, thanked her, and walked out into the morning sun. For the first time in 6 years, I felt my lungs fill all the way. The wedding day arrived. The venue was a large hall decorated with white roses and gold ribbons, exactly the wedding I had wanted for myself, now given to another woman. Guests filled the chairs. Music played. Naomi walked down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my first car. And I stood at the back of the room, holding my purse, waiting. Margaret saw me first. Her face twisted. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. I walked past her without a word. The music faltered. Guests turned. Daniel was at the altar, holding Naomi's hand. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. "Aveline, leave. This isn't your moment." I walked to the center of the aisle, directly in front of everyone. Then I opened my purse and pulled out the envelope. "You're right," I said, loud enough for the back row to hear. "This isn't my moment, it's yours." I held up the envelope. Inside this envelope is the reason I spent 6 years being called the empty house. The reason I took hormones that made me vomit. The reason I cried myself to sleep while you scrolled through your phone. Daniel's face went pale. "Stop," he said. I didn't stop. 7 years ago, you received a diagnosis. Severe male factor infertility. Almost zero chance of fathering a child. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Naomi's hand slipped out of Daniel's. "You knew before we married. You knew when you watched me suffer. And you let everyone, your mother, your sister, every single person in this room, believe I was the problem." Margaret stepped forward. "You lying." I pulled out the report and held it high. "This is from Westside Medical Center. Dated March 14th, 7 years ago. Daniel Mercer, diagnosis by 3 subsequent specialists." I turned to Naomi. "He will never give you a child. He will watch you go through every treatment I went through. And when you can't produce an heir, he will replace you too." Naomi's face crumpled. Her father stood up, red-faced. "Is this true?" he shouted at Daniel. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in his life, he had no silence to hide behind. Chloe started screaming at me. Margaret grabbed my arm. I shook her off. "Don't touch me," I said. "You spent 6 years calling me worthless. But the only worthless person in this family is the man you raised." The room erupted. Guests shouted. Naomi's mother started crying. Naomi herself tore off her veil and threw it at Daniel. "You monster," she screamed. "You would have done this to me too." Daniel tried to speak. "I can explain." But no one was listening anymore. His reputation, his family's social standing, his carefully constructed lie, all of it collapsed in under 2 minutes. I stood in the chaos, perfectly still. Daniel finally looked at me, his eyes wet. "You destroyed me," he said. I shook my head. "No, you destroyed yourself 6 years ago. I just showed everyone the wreckage." He lunged toward me, but 2 guests held him back. "I'll divorce you," he shouted. I smiled, a small sad final smile. Already done. I pulled folded papers from my purse and dropped them at his feet. Signed this morning. You don't have to do a thing except live with what you did. I turned and walked down the aisle. Behind me, the noise faded into a dull roar. I didn't look back, not at Daniel, not at Margaret. Not at the white roses or the gold ribbons. I walked out the front door, into the parking lot, and got into my car. And for the first time in 6 years, I drove without a destination, just away. Sometimes the best revenge is a signed paper and a full tank of gas. Now I live in a small apartment near the coast. I still work as a nurse. And last year I became a mother, not through biology but through adoption. A little boy named Matteo who calls me Mama. And has the loudest laugh I've ever heard. Daniel, I heard, moved to another state. His second wedding never happened. His mother refuses to speak to him. And he still can't have children. Funny how the truth has a way of settling every score, isn't it? If you made it to the end, please like this video and subscribe to Winds of Thought. Share your own story in the comments. I read every single one. And remember, you are not what they told you never were.